the Upanishads in two parts. Part 2, translated by F. Max Muller. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Second Adhyaya, fourth Brahmana. Now when Yajnavalkya was going to enter upon another state, he said, Maitreyi, verily, I am going away from this my house into the forest. Forsooth, let me make a settlement between thee and that Katyayani, my other wife. Maitreyi said, My lord, if this whole earth full of wealth belonged to me, tell me, should I be immortal by it? No, replied Yajnavalkya. Like the life of rich people will be thy life, but there is no hope of immortality by wealth. And Maitreyi said, What should I do with that by which I do not become immortal? What my lord knoweth of immortality? Tell that to me. Yajnavalkya replied, Thou who art truly dear to me, thou speakest dear words. Come, sit down, I will explain it to thee, and mark well what I say. And he said, Verily, a husband is not dear, that you may love the husband, but that you may love the self. Therefore, a husband is dear. Verily, a wife is not dear, that you may love the wife, but that you may love the self. Therefore, a wife is dear. Verily, sons are not dear, that you may love the sons, but that you may love the self. Therefore, sons are dear. Verily, wealth is not dear, that you may love wealth, but that you may love the self. Therefore, wealth is dear. Verily, the Brahmin class is not dear, that you may love the Brahmin class, but that you may love the self. Therefore, the Brahmin class is dear. Verily, the Kshatriya class is not dear, that you may love the Kshatriya class, but that you may love the self. Therefore, the Kshatriya class is dear. Verily, the worlds are not dear, that you may love the worlds, but that you may love the self. Therefore, the worlds are dear. Verily, the Devas are not dear, that you may love the Devas, but that you may love the self. Therefore, the Devas are dear. Verily, creatures are not dear, that you may love creatures, but that you may love the self. Therefore, are creatures dear. Verily, everything is not dear, that you may love everything, but that you may love the self. Therefore, everything is dear. Verily, the self is to be seen, to be heard, to be perceived, to be marked. O Maitreyi, when we see, hear, perceive, and know the self, then all this is known. Whosoever looks for the Brahmin class elsewhere than in the self was abandoned by the Brahmin class. Whosoever looks for the Kshatriya class elsewhere than in the self was abandoned by the Kshatriya class. Whosoever looks for the worlds elsewhere than in the self was abandoned by the worlds. Whosoever looks for the Devas elsewhere than in the self was abandoned by the Devas. Whosoever looks for creatures elsewhere than in the self was abandoned by the creatures. Whosoever looks for anything elsewhere than in the self was abandoned by everything. This Brahmin class, this Kshatriya class, these worlds, these Devas, these creatures, this everything, all is that self. Now as the sounds of a drum, when beaten, cannot be seized externally by themselves, but the sound is seized when the drum is seized, or the beater of the drum, and as the sounds of a conch shell, when blown, cannot be seized externally by themselves, but the sound is seized when the shell is seized, or the blower of the shell, and as the sounds of a lute, when played, cannot be seized externally by themselves, but the sound is seized when the lute is seized, or the player of the lute, as clouds of smoke proceed by themselves out of a lighted fire, kindled with damp fuel. Thus, verily, O Maitreyi, has been breathed forth from this great being what we have as Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharva, Girasas, Itihasa, legends, Purana, cosmogonies, Vidya, knowledge, The Upanishads, sit down teachings. Slokas, verses. Sutras, prose rolls. Anuvyakhyanas, glosses. Vyakhyanas, commentaries. From him alone, all these were breathed forth, as all the waters find their center in the sea, all touches in the skin, all tastes in the tongue, all smells in the nose, all colors in the eye, all sounds in the ear, all precepts in the mind, all knowledge in the heart, all actions in the hands, all movements in the feet, and all the Vedas in speech. As a lump of salt, when thrown into the water, becomes dissolved into water, and cannot be taken out again. But wherever we taste the water, it is salt. Thus verily, O Maitreyi, does this great being, endless, unlimited, consisting of nothing but knowledge, rise from out these elements and vanish again in them. When he has departed, there is no more knowledge. Name, I say, O Maitreyi. Thus spoke Yajnavalkya. Then Maitreyi said, Here thou hast bewildered me, sir, when thou sayest that having departed, there is no more knowledge. But Yajnavalkya replied, O Maitreyi, I say nothing that is bewildering. This is enough, O beloved, for wisdom. For when there is, as it were, duality, then one sees the other, one smells the other, one hears the other, one salutes the other, one perceives the other, one knows the other. But when the self only is all this, how should he smell another? How should he see another? How should he hear another? How should he salute another? How should he perceive another? How should he know another? How should he know him by whom he knows all this? How, O beloved, should he know himself, the knower? And this verse 13 here, this last word here, instead of the last line B adds 4, 5, 15, that self is to be described by no. He is incomprehensible, for he cannot be comprehended. He is imperishable, for he cannot perish. He is unattached, for he does not attach himself. Unfettered, for he does not suffer. He does not fail. How, O beloved, should he know the knower? Thus, O Maitreyi, thou hast been instructed. Thus far goes immortality. Having said so, Yajnavalkya went away into the forest. 15. See also the Khandogya Upanishad 7.24, 1. And, La ilaha. You start with that negation of these imaginations, of these creations, of these whatever, as if they're gods. Or that they're the independent power of some sort. Also in verse 13 we have perceiving another. B inserts how should he touch another. And should he salute? Hear is what B says. Should he hear another? Salute, B says. Another. B inserts taste. C, smell with B. Smell another. C, B. And perceive the other. B inserts one touches the other. Salutes the other. B inserts one hears the other. For wisdom, hears the other. B insert tastes the other. Hears the other. Touches the other. Okay. For wisdom, verily, beloved, that self is imperishable and of an indestructible nature. No more knowledge. Here, sir, thou hast landed me in utter bewilderment. Indeed, I do not understand him, is what text B says. And text B says with verse 12, but knowledge, as a mass of salt, has neither inside nor outside, but is altogether a mass of taste. Thus, indeed, has that self neither inside nor outside, but is altogether a mass of knowledge. And The lump of salt mentioned in verse 12, see the Khandogya Upanishad 6.13. And the commentaries, B adds what is sacrificed, what is poured out, food, drink, this world and the other world, and all creatures. And verse 7, now as F. Max Muller construes sa yatha with avam va'e in 12. Looking upon 11 is probably a later insertion. The sa is not the pronoun, but a particle, as in sa, yadeh, sa, ket, and so on. In verse 6, these creatures, B has all these creatures, these devas, B has these devas, these Vedas. But the devas that abandon, B inserts whosoever looks for the Vedas, and so on. The commentator translates was abandoned, should be abandoned. And in verse 5, knowing the self, when the self has been seen, heard, perceived, and known, and the devas are dear, B inserts verily, the Vedas are not dear. And verse 5, wealth is dear, B adds verily cattle are not dear, and so on. Thou speakest dear words, in verse 4, thou who art dear to me, thou hast increased what is dear to me in this, B. I have 5 books of Moses that actually goes over the different readings there. Tell that clearly to me, tell that to me, at verse 3. Verse 2, immortal by it. Should I be immortal by it, or no? B. Into the forest, in verse 1, instead of ud yasyan, B gives pravragisyan, the more technical term. Maitrei, also verse 1, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.5, the story begins, Yagnavalkya had 2 wives, Maitreyi and Katyayani. Of these, Maitreyi was conversant with Brahman, but Katyayani possessed such knowledge only as women possess. I think that's a bit insulting, right? But the 4th Brahmana, the Mother Yandina text, page 1062, to the end of the 3rd Brahmana of the 2nd Adhyaya, all that has been taught does not yet impart the highest knowledge, the identity of the personal and the truest self, the Brahman. In the 4th Brahmana, in which the knowledge of the true Brahman is to be set forth, the samnyasa, the retiring for the world, is enjoined while all desires cease and no duties are to be performed. Samnyasa, parivragya. The story is told again with slight variations in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 4.5. The more important variations occurring in 4.5 are added here, marked with B. There are, besides the various readings of the Madhyandina Saka of the Satyapatha Brahmana, see also Dusan Vedanta, page 185.